Thank you so much for joining us for day 4 of the Sikh Coalition Summer Series. The Sikh Coalition Summer Series is a week-long virtual event bringing community members together to learn from one another, discuss important issues that may not get the attention that they deserve, and to engage in fun and educational activities for all ages. We have over 35 sessions planned for the Sangat for this week, and we're about half done now. And we really hope that you will continue to join us throughout the week. We're incredibly excited to be welcoming Jaspreet Kaur today to lead a very critical conversation titled Raising Sikh Kids, Fostering an Anti-Racist Household. This is one of 2 Raising Sikh Kids sessions that we are doing, the other one being on Saturday, about understanding your child's mental health needs, also an extremely critical conversation. Dr. Jaspreet Kaur is a professor and program coordinator in the Child and Youth Care program at Humber College in Toronto. A community organizer and educator, her practice involves radical youth work and underserved populations across North America. Jaspreet serves on the board of directors of the Sikh Feminist Research Institute and the national board of the World Sikh Organization. We are big fans. And she is also the editor of the Relational Child and Youth Care Practice Journal, as well as the co-host of the awesome podcast, Ask Canadian Sikhs. In my world, Jaspreet Kaur is a fierce advocate for equality, justice, and truly does everything in her power to build a more equitable world. She's truly a force, and her work of centering marginalized communities and voices is truly inspiring. And in my life, she's an incredible role model and Kaur to look up to for her kindness, her courage, intelligence, and her hard work. And it's really my honor to be in her Sangat. We are so lucky to have her join us today to start this conversation for Sikh parents and those who have young Sikh ones that they truly care about in their lives. So thank you so much, Jaspreet Kaur, for hosting this conversation. For those of you who are joining us, we will have the chat open for this talk. Please use it to respond to any questions that Jaspreet Kaur is asking, and use it to ask questions as well. We hope there will be time for Q&A at the end, but there is a lot planned. So we'll do our best to get to some questions at the end, but if there are any questions that are left unanswered, you can always connect with our lovely speaker at her email and her Instagram that are both listed here. Okay, with that, welcome Jaspreet Kaur, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I am going to start my screen share. Okay, and Helen, can I get a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I am so excited to be here. This talk is at the intersection of everything that is important to me. And I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. So I'm tuning in today from the very rainy city of Toronto, Ontario. Our home is on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas. There are currently many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis folks who continue to call Toronto home. And that is a really important part of all of the work that we do. So my family has a commitment to decolonizing, and land acknowledgements are always a start of our work. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes with it, and that's a separate presentation. My clicker is not working. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I always use this as my introduction slide. This is drawn by my friend Amrita. She's the one watering us, because if you had the good fortune of doing Rupinder's workshop with her, Rupinder talks about what our superpowers are, and Amrita's superpower is that she nurtures. So that's her nurturing Rupinder and myself, and Rupinder and I do trainings on cultural humility and anti-oppressive work, amongst other things. So that's little me, and also representation, because we don't often get to see good images of Sikh women and people that look like us. So I always like having that up there. I am a child and youth care practitioner. This is why this presentation is the intersections of everything that I am. I am a Sikh. That's really important. And I am committed to anti-racist work. And as of a couple years ago, I am the proud stepmom to now teenagers, 13 and 15. So I am a parent. And I think if I had done this workshop before I had kids, I would have been full of X, Y, and Z, and here's what you do, and there's what you do. And I think the parents on this call will agree that it is one of the most humbling experiences. And you realize that there's no amount of expertise or perfect answers, but all we can do is try our best and try and raise our kids with the Sikhi that we believe in. Be kind to ourselves. Know that there's no perfect formula for having grist. There's no perfect way to run a household. There's no perfect way to raise kids, but we can always keep learning and trying to do a little bit better. Okay, so this is the description we had up front, and it was that this talk is basically going to talk about how the principles of Sikhi coincide with an anti-racist approach and how we can use some of that in running our households. What we're going to do in the modest goals for the small amount of time that we have, we're going to talk about anti-oppression, we're going to talk about anti-racism, we're going to do an interactive activity, and then we're actually going to talk about how we do some of this work in our homes. Okay, so I know we have a varying amount of expertise on the call, and that could mean that you are very well versed in some of these definitions, and for some folks it could mean that you're hearing some of these for the first time. The gist of an anti-oppressive perspective is, or that lens, is to look at the power in the world and to try and reduce the differences between that power. So it's exactly what it sounds like, being anti-oppression, and everything that you do committing to trying to dismantle those systems of oppression. So some of the 101, the key terms that you have to know if you're going to do this work is how to think about terms like privilege and oppression. And a privilege is something that is an unearned advantage. So if you like gamifying things, if you grew up playing like Super Mario when you got bigger, or if you think about all the kind of superpowers that you could have, they're things that you don't choose. I don't wake up every morning and choose to be brown. I don't wake up every morning and choose to be middle class. They are values that systems have assigned to us, and the power that comes with those values is assigned to us. So they're very much systemic. So it's no more anyone's fault for being white than it is my fault for being brown. They're not individual choices. They're things that the systems give us, and those systems can either give us advantages or they can bring us down. And that's where I think it's really powerful to talk about the definition of oppression as well, because oppression sometimes, and I was having a really rich discussion yesterday with a friend about how dictionaries haven't even caught up. Sometimes we look at oppression, racism being a type of oppression, and we think it's just about the individual prejudice or the individual bias. Someone's racist because they think this thing or they act like that. And when you actually look into the literature and you start going down this path, oppression is a combination of two things. So you do have to have that internal bias or that prejudice, and then you have to have systems of power that back it up, or the ability to cause damage with that prejudice. The example I always use, and if you want to understand it in like a very big way, is if Donald Trump doesn't like folks of Mexican descent, he is backed up by economy, by military, by political systems, and has the ability to do so much with that prejudice. Whereas if someone in a factory worker in Mexico thinks Donald Trump is not smart, that could be a bias, that could be a prejudice, but what power backs it up? So when you look at those things, then it becomes really apparent that as a straight person, people can have mean feelings about straight people. I'm sure that people think, I've done this activity with my students before, and I'll ask them to list all their prejudices about straight people. We're very focused on having kids. We don't know how to dress. We're vanilla. We're judgmental. We're religious, and all of these things. And then what power backs up those prejudices? I can still, as a straight person, I see straight couples on TV. My family is accepted under my work benefits. It's accepted in the community. Religious institutions back up my choices. the prejudices that someone might have against gay people, you can then back them up with systems of media, legal systems, criminal systems, education system, healthcare system, and that makes it so that it's straight people don't experience homophobia. The worst thing we can experience is prejudice. It's not nice. I don't like it when people say mean things about me because I'm straight, but I don't experience homophobia. I don't experience systemic oppression on the basis of my race. I do have a complex intersecting identity. So I do experience oppression on other bases, and nobody is denying that. But straight, and you keep going down that path, straight people don't experience homophobia. White people don't experience racism. Rich people don't experience classism. Able-bodied people don't face discrimination on the basis of ability, so on and so forth. So that definition of oppression is really important. And it's also really important to understand that racism and all other oppressions are a fact. And I say that because we like to accept other forms of knowledge production as facts. Nobody really says like, oh, math is such a subjective thing. You know, who really says 2 + 2 is 4? But when it comes to subject matter expertise in really heartfelt topics like racism, we have a tendency to say, well, that's just how you see it. You're just angry. I'm concerned about people who aren't angry when it comes to issues of racism. I'm worried why I think being angry is a just response. I think that's a valid response. But it's also this oppression and this way of looking at it, this conceptual framework is based in fact. Race-based stress is a fact. It can impact your blood pressure. It can impact your entire lifespan, how you access housing, how you access healthcare. All of these things are facts. They're more than just biases or things that people are angry about. One of the ones I just learned was that for skin conditions in medicine, there is a Black doctor in the UK who just wrote a book about how to diagnose skin conditions on dark brown and Black skin, because the medical system assumes whiteness. And so when it says like, in this condition, you'll find that you get blue around the lips. In this condition, you'll find red bumps on the skin. Those things don't manifest the same way on dark brown and Black skin. So we have to start thinking about what the systems of violence are. The rain is coming down in such a beautiful way here. I wish you all could see it, but let me know if you can't hear it because of the rain. Okay, so getting back to our families and getting back to our kids. What does that mean for children? And can children actually learn to be racist? We are not born with the ability to take our prejudice and incorporate it into systems of power and to hurt other people. We actually learn all of these things. We learn Black equals violent. We learn brown equals terrorist. We learn Indigenous equals paying taking stuff from the system, not having to pay taxes. So in terms of racial bias, this is from one of the studies that I pulled, and there are many, many studies, and you can feel free to go on your own journey with what the science has to say about it. But children start learning about racial differences as early as 6 months. Kids are able to tell the difference between races, at which point a baby's brain can notice race-based differences. Racial bias can be internalized as early as age 2. So these are the kind of studies where like little Black girls want white dolls because the white dolls are prettier. You can internalize those prejudice ideas about your own race. Children, and these are direct quotes, and I have the author here, children actually learn racial bias the way they learn a new language. For example, if racial bias is inherent in the household, the way language is, the child will learn it. Unlearning it in adolescence is much more difficult, just as it is more difficult to learn a second language at that age. So we learn racial bias. Our brains developmentally are very open when we're younger. They're malleable. That is when we learn a lot of things. And if you can kind of knit that racial bias into the brain of a kid when they're young, the good news is if it can be learned, it can be unlearned, but it's the same way that we learn everything else as human beings. It becomes more difficult to unlearn, not impossible, but more difficult to unlearn as you get older. Okay, so the first interactive thing I would like to do is I would like you to tell me how do kids learn racism? So I want you to use the chat. And what are the, if kids are learning as early as 2 years old, and at 6 months they can tell the difference, at 2 years old they're internalizing these ideas, by 12, by 13 they're set into their brains. What are the mediums? How are we learning them? So like if I use the example of Barney, our kids will learn it through hearing it, through seeing it when we go to the Gurdwara, through you sitting down and teaching it to them from the Gurkha. So we got attitudes in culture, parents, modeling behavior, body language, media, TV, subtle behaviors, visually from hearing, school, absolutely. Culture, community, grandparents, absolutely. Yes. And as you continue to reflect on these, I want you to remember them, because every method a child has of learning racism can then become the same medium for unlearning. So if I can learn it through the TV I watch and the media I consume, that's really good news, because that means if I bring in more Black voices in my home, if I start watching films that are written and produced by Indigenous folks, then my kids that'll become normalized and they'll start to internalize it as well. Okay. Anti-racism. And I think some of this work is really well done by folks from the Black community, and especially because that is at the forefront of a lot of conversations. So I wanted to talk specifically about anti-Black racism. That you might have heard terms like BIPOC or IBPOC, where now in anti-racist work, we are differentiating between the experiences of Indigenous, Black, and other people of color. There is strength in saying we all experience racism in the same way. There is times when we're going to use the general term racism because it gives us, politically, it gives us a lot of clout to move forward. And there are times where it's going to give us more strength to actually name the different experiences of racism and to be able to dismantle those the way they are. So Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, who is one of the, right now he is the head of guidance, he's one of the people that we constantly turn to for information on anti-racism, says, this is from an article he wrote, a racist is someone who supports a racist policy through their actions, or inaction expressing a racist idea, and an anti-racist is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. So Dr. Kendi says we are moving beyond, are you racist, or do you recognize that it's a bad thing? He's saying there are two options. You are a part of this world. You are impacting this world. Everything you purchase, everything you say, everything you do, everything you're complicit in, either pushes the world in a more racist direction or it pushes the world in a less racist direction. And are you a collaborator in the world that's trying to become less racist? So the things that you do, your ideas, your actions, the way you support policy, are you pushing toward, it's a bit of a binary, but before I think what was available to us in anti-oppressive work was being able to just feel bad. Well, I can see that Breonna Taylor is dead, I feel bad. That's not the same as being anti-racist. That's not action. That's not doing something to make the world less racist. That's like, I'm just gonna sit in this until I feel better. Or I can see that that's bad. I did the reading, I watched the movie, I understand that racism is bad. And that kind of led us down, that gave us that middle ground. And I believe in Dr. Kendi's work that falls into being complicit with racism. And so it's not enough to just understand that racism is bad. We have to work towards being anti-racist. I'm gonna show a video because I think bringing in Black voices where they're talking about racism is one of the best things we can do. Oh.
Now, when I was growing up, I had friends from all different types of backgrounds. And I mean, race was something that we never really talked about that much.
Is the sound okay?
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
But there would be times when someone would say off the hook kind of comment or make a joke that I thought was pretty offensive or out of pocket. And it became very clear.
Just with the sound's actually a little low. I don't know if you make it louder on your end, that'll help.
I'm going to stop the screen share because I think sometimes, I forgot to hit the button where it said, yeah, I forgot to make it optimal to, let me know if this makes a difference.
Yeah, much better. Thanks.
Now, when I was growing up, I had friends from all different types of backgrounds. And I mean, race was something that we never really talked about that often. But there would be times where someone would say off the hook kind of comment or...
No, I was just trying to get rid of the ad.
Now, when I was growing up, I had friends from all different types of backgrounds. And I mean, race was something that we never really talked about that often. But there would be times where someone would say off the hook kind of comment or make a joke that I thought was pretty offensive or out of pocket. And it became very clear that their parents or whoever never really talked to them about race. And I mean, I understand. Race can be an uncomfortable topic to talk about. But with the police killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless other Black people over the years and decades, fired up protesters from all walks of life are leaning into that discomfort to speak out against police brutality and structural racism. And on the front lines of these protests are young people.
I'm here today because the Black future in this country is in crisis. It has been in crisis for a long time. The fact that people are still being killed with impunity by this force that is supposed to be protecting and serving us is absolutely unacceptable.
There's things in this country that have been set up since the institution of slavery that make it hard for Black people to be able to live comfortably and freely without having some sort of resistance or feeling like their life is being threatened on a constant basis.
There's lack of accountability. People aren't, being told what they're doing is wrong, and so it creates this ideology that what they're doing is okay, and that just perpetuates a system that puts everybody down,
In the wake of these protests, the term anti-racism is popping up all over the place. There's TED Talks on anti-racism, books about anti-racism are hitting the top of the bestsellers list. Even late night comedians are trying to understand what exactly the term means.
You also talk about the difference between not racist and anti-racist. Can you differentiate that for me?
But anti-racism isn't a new word. It has a history and was used by civil rights movements throughout the 20th century. And now it's making a comeback. So today, we're diving in and asking, what is anti-racism and what does it mean to be anti-racist? Before we tackle what anti-racism means, let's all get on the same page about what racism means. You've got in-your-face racism, where a person is prejudiced against another person because of the color of their skin. But it can also be more subtle, like not hiring someone because they have a Black-sounding name. But when that kind of prejudice gets baked into society, like it has in the US, you get structural or systemic racism, which is when a society is designed in a way that reinforces and perpetuates discrimination against certain races. You want an example? Well, here's an example. Between 2012 and 2016, Black males convicted of a crime received sentences on average 19% longer than white males convicted of essentially the same crime. Perhaps Black offenders don't make as much money as white offenders, so they can't afford good lawyers. Maybe Black people get judges that hand down stricter sentences. Maybe it's both, but that's the point. Society's been structured in a way that hurts Black people harder, and it largely stems from one of the darkest stains on American history: slavery.
Systemic racism is really coming out of racial slavery. And ever since racial slavery in this country, Black people were not necessarily considered citizens.
That's Peniel Joseph, a professor at UT Austin who specializes in civil rights history.
And so ever since, even after the end of slavery, systemic racism meant that Black people were segregated to certain parts of cities, like in Austin, Texas, where I live, but that could be Oklahoma, it could be Los Angeles, New York. They had less access to land in the South, but they had less access to getting businesses in the North and everywhere. It means that they're treated differently by the criminal justice system, by police, basically in all walks of life.
In our conversations that we have with young people, a lot of it made me feel like they view racism and all these issues as if they live in this bubble of the past. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like all those things you're talking about, oh, Black people couldn't go to certain places, they couldn't do certain things. And it's like people kind of go, well, you can now, so what's the problem?
I think part of what is so powerful as a historian is narrative. And I think the narrative that we've told ourselves is that, one, we don't talk about racial slavery. So that's taboo. So shh about racial slavery. The other is that there was a woman named Rosa Parks who was awesome, and she refused to sit on a segregated bus. And then you had Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who really was leading the March on Washington, but then he unfortunately was killed. But then you say Barack Obama was elected in 2008, and you have a Black president and a Black First Lady, Michelle Obama, and you basically say that's the story of the civil rights movement in the United States, where there's a happy ending. We said we're post-racial, but then when we really look closer, we say we can see that we're really not post-racial. There's all these different things that are still unjust and unequal in our society, and this is connected to something much larger.
Rules or policies may appear race neutral, but in practice, they aren't. And that's true not just at the federal or state level, but at the local level too. Take school dress codes. It makes sense that schools don't want students to be distracted by revealing or inappropriate clothing, but the problem is what's considered distracting or inappropriate is really subjective and can end up reinforcing white norms. For example, do-rags, dreadlocks, and braids often get banned, which all affect Black students more. And when you look at the data around how school dress codes are enforced, that's what you see. Black girls end up being disciplined more harshly than their white peers. I know when I was in middle school and I had braids, I had to shave my head when I started at a new school. I don't know what that has to do with my learning capabilities, and I still don't know nearly 15 years later, but I did it. According to anti-racism, in order to address systemic racism, simply being not racist isn't enough. To quote Ibram X. Kendi, a historian and leading scholar of race and discriminatory policy in America, the opposite of racist isn't not racist, it is anti-racist, and that requires work. Emmanuel Acho, a sports analyst and former NFL player, went on Stephen Colbert and did a great job explaining this.
It's not enough in 2020 to be not racist. Not racist meaning I am passive when it comes to racism. That's what I mean by being anti-racist, Stephen. It's not just, okay, just because I don't say the N-word or just because I'm not scared of Black people. If you see it, you have to speak on it and call it out.
Anti-racism is an active state of mind. It's the active process of identifying and opposing racism.
Being anti-racist means also calling out racist policies in institutions and cultures that might not seem racist, but that are racist because they have a disparate impact on Black people.
Examples are everywhere. Voter ID laws that disenfranchise Black and brown voters, majority non-white school districts getting less money per student than districts with mostly white students, housing policies over the decades that have kept Black people in poor communities with less homeownership.
When you think about racism, there's kind of no neutrality. It's either that you're trying to constantly oppose it, or you sort of fall victim to being part of a status quo because we live in a society where there is systemic racism.
In researching this episode, I did come across some opposition to anti-racism as a set of beliefs. I'm not talking about people who don't think racism exists or who don't think it's a big deal. I'm talking about people who recognize that systemic racism is a problem, but take issue with the either-or aspect that is at the center of the anti-racist philosophy. That you're either anti-racist or racist. There is no middle ground. So every conversation, every government policy is either explicitly working toward racial equality or it's actively working against it. This all or nothing approach has some critics comparing anti-racism to a religion, where any questioning of the philosophy is interpreted as an attack and can shut down questions and new ideas. Now, here at Above the Noise, we're not gonna tell you what to think. You gotta do that work and make up your own mind. However, if you're curious about what it takes to be anti-racist, here are some general steps. Step 1 is taking stock of any bias or prejudice that you may have and then challenging those thoughts. Personally, I've had well-intentioned white people say things to me like, "You're so well-spoken," or "You're so cultured." And in their minds, they're totally offering me a compliment, but it's definitely not a compliment. It's for sure an insult. But it's also important to understand that you don't have to be perfect to be anti-racist. I love this quote from Ijoma Oluo, a Nigerian-American writer. "The beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be an anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself, and it's the only way forward." Step 2 is educating yourself about how racism is systemic. It's about understanding what kinds of policies produce negative outcomes for people of color. We gave you some examples, so now you can't say you don't know what systemic racism is or that it's not a problem. And there are more examples to read up on and understand. Step 3 is taking action. At the individual level, that means speaking up when a friend says a racist joke or a family member uses a racist stereotype. In the moment, it can be easier to just stay silent and not rock the boat. But anti-racism demands you call it out and address it. At the structural level, it's thinking through how to dismantle racist policies to create new policies to help level the playing field. So, using the dress codes example we talked about earlier, maybe you educate teachers about stereotypes so they don't unfairly target Black girls. Maybe you ask students to write their own dress codes that reflect their values. Or maybe you just get rid of dress codes altogether.
It's a lifetime of work. And you can think of that as either good or bad, but you have to work on it. This is not something you do for one day or 1 week or 1 year. You have to keep it up, and you have to bequeath that legacy to your children and grandchildren as well.
All right, folks, that's our dive into anti-racism. Now we want to hear from you. What are y'all already doing in your schools or in your communities to combat?
So we are going to do an activity together to keep diving into this idea, and especially go a little bit further into the fact that anti-Black racism is not our experience of racism. This is one that Black activists and scholars have been talking about for years, and again, because of the current political moment, it's really come into the forefront of everyone's conversation. That Peggy McIntosh is a woman who created an activity for white people, and it's called My Invisible Knapsack. And she realized that while white people were starting to understand all of the racism that other people experienced, so they were understanding oppression, they still were having difficulty understanding privilege. So like this unearned kind of extra superpower you have going through the world because you live it and it's your norm, and you kind of forget that it's there. And so she had a checklist, and she would make people go through it. I can go to the grocery store and use a credit card and nobody questions me. I can go to a mall and I can go shopping without being harassed. And the idea is by the end of the list that this person will have reflected on, oh wow, I always knew there was oppression, but I'm now just realizing that I actually walk through this world so much easier than anyone else in a different skin color because of my race. And so taking from Peggy McIntosh's work, I created one called My Brown Knapsack to help especially brown folks understand that while we do experience racism, and that's valid, we do not have a history of slavery the way that Black folks do, which also happened in Canada. I don't know if there's any Canadian folks on the call. We pretend that folks were not enslaved in Canada. It definitely happened. We've erased our history, and we just think that we were, the people that freed everyone and saved everyone. We don't have the same history of Black folks on the land that we're on, and we don't experience the same type of oppression. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you have a second device or you just want to use the device that you're on, you have two options. You go to polev.com in your browser / Jaspreet Kaur 938, or you can use your phone and text that word. Jaspreet, pardon? I can put it in the chat, yeah. Which one, the link? Yeah. Okay, polev.com. So polev.com / I gotta send to everyone. It's just 938. Okay. So if you go to that link, you should see an active poll. Just gonna make sure that, yeah, my poll is active. And once you're there, you can vote, and we're gonna go through some of these questions together. Some people might have these advantages as they go through life, and some people may not. And we're just gonna take some time to reflect on whether or not we walk through the world with these advantages that maybe we haven't paid attention to. So my ancestors were able to buy land and accumulate wealth. A part of that wealth has been shared with me. So that's land in India, or your parents came here and they were able to buy a house and pay it off. Maybe they paid for my school, maybe they paid for my wedding. Somehow that's connected to land and the fact that they were allowed to accumulate wealth. Okay, and while folks are still answering this, there are a lot of different experiences of being Black. There are Black folks that are in Canada and the US because their ancestors came here through a history of slavery. There are folks that immigrated here. They are the generation that migrated here, and they know where they come from, and they don't have that history with the land. There are folks who have been displaced multiple times, may have ended up in the Caribbean and then come here. In Canada, we have generations of women who have come as caregivers. So this is not the whole Black experience, but for some Black folks, this is not true for their families. And especially in Canada, where historically segregated Black communities were not allowed to own, buy houses, were not allowed to own land. And this is definitely the history of the United States as well. I know we have folks tuned in from other countries as well. Some of us, and most of us, for most of us, this is a yes, some of us are able to function in this world because systems and policies allowed for our parents to accumulate wealth and then share a part of that wealth with us. Think about what it does to a family to not have the ability to accumulate wealth in the same way. Okay. I have to figure out how to get to the next question from this screen. Okay, next. Okay, I think my next person. Okay, so the next question should have shown up on your screen, and it is, in my current country, in my current country, my people have never been excluded from schools, churches, restaurants, hospitals, and public transportation. So yes being that they haven't been excluded from those places. No being that they have. And again, different places have different histories. One of the things to reflect on, 50-50, that's interesting. My parents' generation were never explicitly excluded from those places, were through covert systems. I have never been explicitly, I've never gone to a restaurant where it says no brown people allowed. And there are definitely in Canada and in, who was I just listening to? I was listening to an old interview of Congressman Lewis, who just passed away, and he had to travel through the states when he was a kid, go through multiple states with his food packed because his uncle had said there's no restaurant that we can stop in. Okay, so let's go to the next one. I am not afraid that my child will, I know these are not worded in the greatest ways because the poll only gave me the yes or no option. So I am not afraid that so if I have this advantage, then yes, I have that. So I can say that, yes, I have that in Toronto with my kid. That's an advantage I have. I don't, when I send my kids to school in the morning, I'm not scared that they're gonna end up in jail. So that would be a yes for me. Okay. We have systems that by design funnel Black and Indigenous kids in Canada and the US into the criminal system. It is done with intention. In the US, it is, if you've watched The 13th, if you haven't watched The 13th by Ava DuVernay, I highly recommend it. She shows how enslaved folks were then funneled into the criminal justice system because you could use prison labor for free. It's connected to economy, it's connected to the prison industrial system, it's connected to trying to eradicate radical Black populations because they're anti-war. It's a way of taking a scythe through communities. It is not a history that brown communities have. So our children are not targeted. So where Black and white men might use drugs in the same way, Black men are far more likely to go to jail for drug use. Brown kids are not targeted in the same way. Yeah. Okay, so then a few more we'll do. I'm not scared that my children will be taken away from me by the child welfare system. So that's a yes for me. So I'm not afraid that my kids will be taken away and put into the child welfare. That's an advantage I have. In Canada, the residential school system and the child welfare system were used as methods of genocide. And this has not been used as a method of violence for brown communities in the same way. So this is an advantage I walk through the world with. My children are not targeted to be put into the child welfare system as a means of genocide. I was able to choose where I live. No formal or informal structures made me feel welcome. That, again, history in Canada, there are neighborhoods that have a history of segregation where people were not allowed to live. In Canada, in the US, there are still neighborhoods where it's very clear whether or not you are welcome. And while folks, there's these great infographics that break down large cities, and you can actually see that while people will come together and work together, we still go into neighborhoods that through informal policies are quite segregated. I've been taught that fair skin is more beautiful than dark skin. So is that something that I walk through the world with? And again, if that is something that my mom very proudly told me that she's been using Fair and Lovely cream since she was 18. She's like, I'm not stopping now. She's the exact same color she was when she was 18, so it doesn't work. But she still has been using it for a very long time. And again, that if lighter is beautiful, then I walk through the world with the advantage of not being Black. Most of my interactions with the police have been positive. This is an interesting one because the data shows, research shows that people have a tendency to think about the police, not as a system, but as their personal interactions with the police. And this one stands out to me because my interactions with the police have been positive. Most of the time, I was a frequent flyer with aging grandparents, went to the hospital all the time. Most of my interactions with the police are when I would call 911 because someone had to go to the hospital. They would swarm my house. I would get fire, paramedics, supervisors, and they were so kind and so helpful and stayed with me and sat with me and made sure that everything was okay before they left. It can be really hard to understand a system of violence because my kids are not targeted by the police and because my interactions with the police have been positive. That's an advantage I carry through this world. I think we've got about 15 minutes left, so I'm not going to do all of them. Let's do this one as the last one. I do not personally know anyone who's been killed by the police in my current country. And I said current country because we know a lot about the history of Punjab, and a lot of us have lost folks there. Okay, so most of us do not know someone who has personally been killed by the police. In the city of Toronto, there is a Toronto Vital Signs report, which is released every year that shows data. Most men, and the last Vital Signs I read was 2018, 90% of the men that were shot and killed by the police in Toronto were Black. These are facts. This is not about being angry. This is not about the police are good or bad or a few bad apples. Again, this is rooted in evidence. This is rooted in data, and that's really important. Okay, so let's go back to that's your brown knapsack, and there are more questions, and those are ones that I just, as I do this work, and the more it comes to my attention that my experience is not the Black experience, I bring more and more into those, and I understand that I walk this world easier than my Black brothers and sisters because I don't have the same history of violence on this land. The same is true for, they don't have the same history of being called terrorists. They don't have the history of the Air India bombing. This is not the oppression Olympics. If I pay attention to someone else's pain, it doesn't invalidate mine. And my Black friends, colleagues have always showed up when I've asked for support. And so it's the very least that we can do to not use those moments to talk about, yeah, but that happens to us too. Yeah, but we are oppressed too. Yeah, but we also experience racism. Okay, so a Sikh approach. So these were the 3 steps that the person in the video was sharing. He had said, step 1, challenge your own biases, which I'm hoping that activity was a starting point to saying like, look, I do have these ideas of the world and they come from a specific place and I have advantages. Step 2, learning about systemic racism, some of the facts that I've dropped, but there's so many, every system possible that you could think of has whiteness as an invisible norm. The way cameras are set up, the way we watch movies, they're there to capture white skin, so dark skin doesn't show up the same way. Film was developed with white skin in mind. The way that we read books it defaults to whiteness. All of our systems, our ideas of family, all of those things. So racism is systemic. And then the third one is the one that we're going to talk about now. So taking action on an individual and structural level. Okay, and whenever I talk about things from a Sikh perspective, it's important that we don't just return to confirmation bias. So we're moving beyond, confirmation bias is like, oh, I believe a thing, and now I'm gonna go look for the evidence that supports that. So when we talk about, well, what does Sikhi have to say about racism or being anti-racist or anti-oppressive? I could go out and find the right metaphor, the right Sakhi, the right Shabd. But it takes a lot of work to mine through, and we've been having this conversation in our home. If you use the wrong metaphor or the wrong Sakhi, you can probably find a way to like throw Bani at someone or throw a Sakhi at someone that proves your point. So if you find something in what I'm saying that you disagree with, please continue to do your own work, continue to read Barney. These are some of the examples that as I'm going on this journey, I'm finding support the work that I'm doing. So a lot of things that we do in present day in English, we can then look to Gurbani and say, oh yeah, that was always there. That was there hundreds of years before the English words for that concept found their way into my mouth. So this is one of those things where there's some things where it's like really complicated, like cancel culture. Does that exist in Sikh history? Did the gurus, get rid of people? Did they punish people who did bad things? Did they bring them in with love and forgiveness? Those are conversations that I feel like are really big. When it comes to anti-oppression, it feels like a resounding and easy yes. It is there in Sikhi. This is one of the 4 shabds that Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj revealed from Babur Bani. And Babur was a Mughal ruler who invaded, and Guru Nanak Dev Ji saw the genocide firsthand and saw the oppression firsthand. And there are 4 shabds throughout Guru Granth Sahib Ji that are revealed as a reflection of Babur Bani. And so you can see in the beginning of the shabd, when they talk about this, they set up what's happening. Khurasan kasmana kiya, Hindustan draya, ape dosna de karte jamkar Mughal chadaya, eti maar pe kurlane tanki dard na aaya. And then I think this is really important, because when I think about power and I think about anti-oppression as being the dismantling of those systems of power, Guru Nanak Dev Ji says, Karta tu sabna ka soi, je sakta sakte ko mare, ta man ros na hoi. So you are saryan da karta, you're the creator. Je sakta sakte ko mare. If someone who is sakt, has power, kills someone else who has power, sakta sakte nu marda, ta man ros na hoi. There's no ros in my heart. Sakta si mare pe vage khasme sa pursai, Ratan vagad vagoy kutti moya sar nakai, ape jod vichhode, ape vekh teri vadiyai. When a lion attacks a cattle, then the master is responsible. These dogs have lost this precious jewel. No one will remember them after they are gone. Sakta si mare pe vage khasme sa pursai. Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj is saying, in a fair fight, in a pound for pound fight, I don't mind. I'm not in pain. You do whatever you want. When you are hurting someone that is less powerful, I will hold you accountable. Je ko na utarai vadda saad kare man pane, khasme nadri kida ave jete chugge dane, marmar jive tan kich paye, nanak naam bakhane. And these translations are ones that Sanpreet Singh and I worked on together. We try and get away from, we're very grateful to all the people that have done translations before us, and we're trying to get away from some of those Judeo-Christian ideas that have worked themselves into our translations. But Guru Nanak Dev Ji in these 4 shabds basically says, you need to look at yourself, you need to fight oppression. And there's evidence that Guru Nanak Dev Ji actually confronted Babur and stood up for all of the people that he saw that were, and the shabds are beautiful, and I encourage you to read the rest as well. The second place in Sikri, in our formula, the Sikri formula for looking at the Sikh Research Institute formula for forming a Gurmat perspective is to look at Gurbani, to look at Ret, and to look at history. So what I bring from Ret is the concept in the Ret of the personal and the political. So the Akal Takht Ret Maryada talks about our personal responsibilities, our personal duties, and then talks about the fact that the Panth, as the Guru, has the responsibility to do seva and to take care of all of humanity. Okay. And then the third example, so when we turn to history, do we have a history of pushing back against systems of oppression? And I know this writing is small, but this is really, really cool and really, really great because we have our Guru period history. The Bani actually serves as history as well because it talks about the invasion of Babur. But in our, specifically in history, in post-Guru period history, the Anand Prasad resolution is what was put forward by the Shromani Akali Dal in the 70s, and then Baba Jarnail Singh took on the calls to action in the Anand Prasad resolution. This is what we were fighting for when the genocide happened in 1984. This is the document that was so controversial and so painful that they killed us over it, and this is what we died fighting for. So I just grabbed parts of it. It's a fairly short document, and you can look it up and read the whole thing as well. But I wanted to bring when the Panth came together and said, this is what we want, they came together to call out systems. And they asked for specific changes. So some of them are, so the Shromani Akali Dal calls on the central and state government to eradicate unemployment, specifically for scheduled and depressed classes, workers, landless and poor farmers, urban poor. Minimum wages should be fixed for all of them. We were asking for rights for refugees from Jammu and Kashmir, rehabilitating them, taking care of poor farmers. The ask is to, was it taxes on tractors? And then this last example that I had here, economic backwardness of the scheduled and non-scheduled castes, provisions and proportionate to population should be made. So it was the reservation system asking for reparation, asking for special rights to be set aside for people who had systemically been put in a bad place. So I think caste comes through more than race. We're a little bit more homogenous race-wise in Punjab, but this is what when I turned to the history of my Panth acting as the Guru, this is what I see. This is what we were willing to die for. Making sure that we dismantled the systems of oppression and looking at those checkpoints and continuing my journey with the Guru Granth and the Guru Panth. I have no hesitation in saying that our role as Sikhs is to be anti-racist and to actively fight the systems that put us in these violent positions. Okay, so I want you to share with me using the chat because we're talking about Sikh households being anti-racist. We're also doing the big work of systems, but where in your family do you live your Sikhi? You can think about in your day, in your house, because this is one of those things where, and I'm just gonna read put them in the chat and I'll read them. One of the things I was most surprised about, because so I'm a step parent, I came in when the kids were already adolescents, and I had all these ideas about, yeah, we'll be a Sikh household and we'll do this and we'll do that. And I got here and you get up when we had school, you make lunches, you go to work, you come back, we got ukulele class, did you do the laundry? Did you buy the cheese? Who's making dinner? Time for that us, time for that us. Okay, and then it's like, we have 45 minutes to be a family before we gotta start doing Kirtan Soila. And I was like, well, I thought we were supposed to be living our Sikhi, and I thought it would be like all Sikhi all the time, and that's what my idea of a family was. Yeah, so where in your day are you finding that you live your Sikhi? All right, Sundays. Little moments in the day. Leaving home in the morning, reminding ourselves to practice empathy and kindness, giving to others, listening to Shabds and Kirtan. Definitely. Morning part, absolutely. I'm keeping my chat open, so I'm gonna keep reading these. And virtual nickname, I love that. Personal practices. So one of the things that comes through in my work is that the work of dismantling violent systems can feel so big, but actual resistance is relational. Every time someone was transformed in Sikhi, it was at a human level. It was through Bani, it was through relationship, it was through the grace of the Guru. There was never like a big policy that said everybody will be transformed and everybody will find Vaheguru, and then it happened. And I think that, I like that bath time, Sikhi talks, doing seva, meal times. That's exactly, y'all are making the exact point that I wanted to get at. When our chance to raise anti-racist children is going to be in relationship. It's not going to be at 9:45 on Wednesday morning when we sit down and we do this. That's part of it, but it's mostly through the stuff we do every day. So when we're talking about all of those mediums, how do kids learn? That's how we're going to ask them to see our Sikhi, and we're going to ask them to unlearn. So in my case, one of the questions I ask, what Black voices can we bring into our house? What are your kids reading? I think we're doing a better job, especially when I look at the kids programming for the summer series. We're doing a good job of getting Sikh content to our kids. Where are our kids consuming Black and Indigenous media, books, voices? How do children participate in our house? So when we, I know in our home, our kids make some decisions about the Swand. So they see that we give our money to things we believe in. We don't give our money to things we don't believe in. And then they can be a part of the process of deciding finances. We do those compasses, the political compasses, even though our kids can't vote, they do figure out how they would vote. One of our kids' schools did them on a school level. So it's about, they're not too young to understand how politics work. How do they participate in our house? Our daughter was cleaning Shastar last week and listening to Dasam Barney. Where in our house, in the way they run the house, are they going to see where we talk about race and where we challenge it? How do we bring the violence of the moment to our children's consciousness? And this is where my child and youth care lens comes into it. How do we do it? I think I had put it here, my last, how do you do it in a developmentally responsive way? So developmentally responsive is the easiest way to say it is meeting people where they're at. So can my kid handle a conversation about how someone was shot while they were jogging because they were Black? I think my 15-year-old can. I think my 13-year-old would need it with more of a conversation. I wouldn't have that conversation with a 2-year-old. It's important that we not hide the world from them, but how do we bring the world to them in a way that they are developmentally ready for? I think TV show, and this is again, like there's a lot more child and youth care work in here, but I think like stories and TV shows with big moral concepts work better for, I would say like 2 to 5. From 12 upwards, my focus would be peer group. I don't think parents have a lot of influence with teenagers. With a lot of humility, I say that. I think one of the best things you can do is make sure that their school is talking about it, that their friends are talking about it, that you enroll them in Gurmat classes. Get someone else to talk about it. Our kids will listen to someone else. They'll be engaged and they'll learn. And when they're talking to us, it's like, oh yeah, I already knew that. So make sure that it's developmentally responsive. Are you putting it in the peer group? Are you bringing it to them directly? Is it in the house? Is it knit into everything? And then how do we model unlearning? I think that was one of the big things that I've had to work on as a parent is, am I showing them my journey of being anti-racist? Am I saying sorry? Am I saying I don't know? Am I saying, you know what, I did think that and that was wrong? Am I embarrassed? Am I saying that I'm embarrassed because there's things that are coming up? All of those things, even if lecturing doesn't work, I think that was a big one with my parents. Lecturing was their methodology of parenting choice. You can definitely, it might not feel like it's working right away, but trust me, if you are showing humility to your kids and if you're showing them that you can say I was wrong and I'm sorry, it's registering somewhere in their brains and it's going to come back and they're going to be able to do it themselves. Okay, and that was everything. I put my contact information up on the screen there. And Harleen Kaur, I know I went over a little bit, and I'm going to leave it to you if you think we should take some questions, or if I should just leave my information and then we'll take questions personally.
Hey, so I think we can take questions for maybe like 3-4 more minutes. It seems like questions are already coming in. So why don't we just go a couple minutes until 5:10 p.m. EST, so that's 6 minutes.
For sure.
Yeah, let's see what you can answer in that time.
And I saw a couple of things asking about the link for the video and asking for the slides. And can I give those both to you, and can you send them out to participants?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I guess questions in the chat if anyone has a question.
Already questions here.
Oh, okay. Do you want to, can you ask them? Because I'm a little.
Yes, give me a second. Let me just go through. But folks, if you have any questions right now, please do ask. Someone is asking if a recording of this will be available later. We do plan to be sharing recordings as long as our speakers are okay with it and give us consent. Okay, so yes, please do ask us questions right here in the chat. While folks are asking, I'll scroll back and look for some others.
Yeah, I can see some questions about caste and last names. I think any of the oppression that we talked about, we focused specifically on race today, but absolutely applies to all of, you can see that in India and in the Nand Prasad resolution, definitely applies to caste.
Someone asked about 30 minutes ago, what are your suggestions on what we can do about racist views of folks in our family? So maybe folks in older generations.
There are some really great resources online in Punjabi and English on how to have those really tough conversations with your parents. As an educator, it's conversations and recognizing growth. So if I have a kid that comes in who absolutely understands the language, they're like already 100%, they're gonna come across as an A+ student no matter what they do. My kid that comes in that's like super racist and then leaves a little bit less racist might have gone from like 60% to 75%. It's still gonna look like they're racist, but they've actually grown more than my kid who already knew everything. And that's kind of how I think about those challenging conversations with family. Be consistent, don't be judgmental, don't alienate people. Your presence in their life will be one of, especially if you are an anti-racist voice in their life, it might be one of those things that actually helps change them. So yeah, recognize their growth, conversation, value that time, and then take care of yourself. So if it is a conversation that is hurting you, that you do not have, it is not your job to educate and save and fix every single person in the entire world. And if it's taking too much of your energy, it's okay to just love them as your family and to take a step back and to switch to something else. Oh, how do you start anti-racist work with a toddler? What is the developmentally appropriate way? So that's the research that I showed was that even, so by 6 months, you can understand racial bias. By 2 years, you're internalizing it. That would be like just an immersive environmental approach. I teach language phonetically, but I believe, which means like I'll teach it letter by letter, but I actually believe that reading in language is acquired in a whole word approach. So I think kids learn to read and hear and talk with all the stuff that's around them. They don't learn, kids don't, they start babbling and they start mimicking. They don't actually do letter by letter when they're learning language. It's the same with being anti-racist. It would be that the books, they have Sikh books, and they also have I think it's called Strong Little Leaders. There's like a book about little Black leaders. It's about a big, huge women who are amazing leaders, but it's like a little kid's book. But
I actually have it. I can bring it. 1 second.
Nice, go get it. Okay, I left my copy in my office, and then my office, I haven't been allowed back in it by March. There you go. Okay, yeah, that's Harrison. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so like have those books in the pile, the kid will reach for them eventually. Make sure that Black and Indigenous voices are just a regular part of their environment. Like it's not weird for them, that they're not gonna have to do what my generation did, which is like I was done all of my education before I realized I never had a Black teacher, a Black professor, and then I suddenly had Black colleagues. Okay, so the poll, some folks are asking to do the poll again. I can release the brown knapsack questions as well, but it's okay if you didn't get to do all the questions. That's fine. It was just a reflection. We got a request to show the book again. Love it. Okay, and I think that takes us to the end of our time. But yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to do this, and thank you for giving me the space, and I will send out all of the resources I shared. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji
Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you everyone for joining us, and yes, Jaspreet Kaur, if you have any resources that you'd like to share, especially based on these comments, we can send that out within the week. Tonight you will get a follow-up email with whatever we can compile, but look out for more information within a week. Thank you again so much for joining us. This is a very, very important conversation, and I'm seeing a lot of love in the chat already. Yeah, so thank you. And then for everyone else who's here, we really hope that you continue to join us for summer series sessions throughout the rest of the week. We have more important conversations about race and solidarity happening in the rest of the day, including a talk in the next 20 minutes by Loveleen Kaur, and then another talk back with W. Kamau Bell in the evening, and we really hope that you get to join us. With that, thank you all so much. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.